In the fall of 2008, as the global financial system teetered on the brink of collapse, federal agents descended on a sprawling office complex in Minnesota. They weren't there for another Wall Street giant. They were there for Tom Petters, a businessman who had built an empire on a foundation of lies. What they uncovered would become one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history, a fraud so audacious that it rivaled even Bernie Madoff's infamous scam. Tom Petters seemed to have it all. He owned luxury homes, a private jet, and controlled a business empire worth billions. His company, Petters Group Worldwide, appeared to be a legitimate wholesale merchandise business, buying electronics from manufacturers and reselling them to big box retailers. On paper, it was a simple, profitable model. But behind the glossy facade, Petters was running one of the most elaborate frauds ever conceived. Born in 1957 in Minnesota, Tom Petters wasn't from money. He started out selling business directories and worked his way into various ventures throughout the 1980s and 90s. By the late 90s, he had founded Petters Company, which would eventually become Petters Group Worldwide. The company claimed to be in the business of buying merchandise, especially electronics like televisions, laptops and cameras, and then reselling them to major retailers at a profit. But here's the thing. Most of those transactions never actually happened. The merchandise didn't exist. The retailers were often unaware they were even part of the scheme. Petters was simply fabricating invoices, purchase orders, and other documents to make it look like his business was booming. It was all an illusion, carefully crafted to lure in investors. The scheme worked like this. Petters would approach hedge funds, investment firms, and wealthy individuals with what seemed like a golden opportunity. He told them he needed short-term financing to purchase large quantities of electronics. Once he flipped the goods to retailers, he promised the investors would get their money back plus a healthy return, sometimes as high as 15 to 20% in just a few months. It sounded almost too good to be true, and of course, it was. To make his pitch more convincing, Petters created an elaborate paper trail. He produced fake purchase orders from well-known retailers like Costco, Sam's Club, and Target. He showed investors warehouse receipts, shipping documents, and contracts, all meticulously forged. Some investors even visited warehouses that appeared to be stocked with merchandise. But those warehouses were props. The boxes on the shelves were often empty, filled with junk, or simply didn't belong to Petters at all. The fraud was classic Ponzi scheme behaviour. Petters used money from new investors to pay off earlier investors, creating the illusion that his business model was legitimate and profitable. Those early returns convinced investors to not only keep their money in the scheme, but to invest even more. Word spread, and soon Petters was pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars from some of the most sophisticated financial institutions in the country. What's shocking is how long he got away with it. The scheme reportedly began as early as 1994 and continued for nearly 15 years. During that time, Petters lived like a king. He bought Polaroid Corporation in 2005, acquiring the iconic brand for what appeared to be a legitimate business expansion. He also purchased Sun Country Airlines, a regional carrier based in Minnesota. These acquisitions gave him credibility and helped mask the fraud. After all, how could someone running a Ponzi scheme afford to buy major companies? But the house of cards was always going to collapse. By 2008, the global financial crisis had made credit tight, and new investments were drying up. Without fresh money coming in, Petters couldn't pay back the earlier investors. Suspicions began to mount. One of his key associates, Deanna Coleman, grew increasingly uncomfortable with what she was seeing inside the company. She went to the FBI in September 2008 and told them everything. Federal agents moved quickly. On October 3, 2008, they raided Petters Group Worldwide offices and arrested Tom Petters. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Prosecutors estimated that over a span of more than a decade, Petters had defrauded investors out of approximately $3.65 billion. That's billion with a B. It was one of the largest Ponzi schemes ever uncovered in the United States, second only to Bernie Madoff's scheme, which was exposed just a few months later. The investigation revealed a massive conspiracy involving multiple accomplices. Deanna Coleman, who ultimately cooperated with authorities, testified that she had helped create fake documents and maintain the fraudulent records for years. Other employees and associates were also implicated, including Michael Catane, Larry Reynolds, and Robert White. Some pleaded guilty and cooperated. Others went to trial. Tom Petters himself maintained his innocence throughout the trial. His defense team argued that he was simply a businessman who'd been deceived by his own employees, that he didn't know the full extent of the fraud happening within his company. But the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented thousands of fake documents, emails, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who detailed exactly how the scheme operated and Petters' central role in orchestrating it. In December 2009, a federal jury found Tom Petters guilty on all 20 counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. The following April, a judge sentenced him to 50 years in federal prison, one of the longest sentences ever handed down in a white-collar crime case. At the time of sentencing, Petters was 52 years old, meaning he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The fallout from the Petters scheme was devastating. Hundreds of investors lost billions of dollars. Some were hedge funds and large financial institutions that could absorb the losses, but many were individuals and smaller firms that were wiped out. Charities, pension funds, and even a few churches had invested in what they believed was a safe, profitable venture. Some victims lost their entire life savings. Lawsuits and bankruptcy proceedings dragged on for years as trustees tried to recover whatever assets they could. One of the most high-profile casualties was Polaroid. The brand had already been struggling in the digital age, and Petters' ownership only made things worse. After his arrest, Polaroid went through bankruptcy proceedings and was eventually sold off. Sun Country Airlines also faced turmoil, though it managed to survive and eventually recover under new ownership. What drove Tom Petters to commit such a massive fraud? Psychologists and financial experts have analysed his case, trying to understand the mentality of someone who could lie on such a grand scale for so many years. Some point to greed and a desire for power and status. Petters enjoyed the trappings of wealth and the respect that came with being a successful businessman. The Ponzi scheme allowed him to live a lifestyle that would have been impossible through legitimate means. Others suggest that once the scheme started, Petters may have felt trapped. Ponzi schemes require a constant influx of new money, and stopping means facing immediate collapse. Perhaps Petters convinced himself that he could eventually make the business legitimate, that one big score would allow him to pay everyone back and walk away clean. But that day never came. Instead, the lies multiplied, the fraud deepened, and the inevitable reckoning grew closer. The Petters case also raises serious questions about due diligence and oversight. How did such a massive fraud go undetected for so long? Some of the investors were sophisticated financial institutions with entire departments dedicated to vetting investment opportunities. Yet they were fooled by fake documents and staged warehouses. It's a reminder that even the most experienced investors can fall victim to fraud, especially when the fraudster is skilled at creating an aura of legitimacy. There were warning signs along the way. Some investors did ask questions about the unusually high returns and the secrecy surrounding certain aspects of the business. But Petters was a master manipulator. He had answers for everything, and his confidence and charm often disarmed skeptics. He also strategically paid off investors who asked too many questions, ensuring their silence and continued loyalty. The timing of the Petters scheme's collapse was almost poetic. Just weeks after his arrest, Bernie Madoff's even larger Ponzi scheme was exposed, shocking the world and dominating headlines. In a way, Madoff's infamy overshadowed Petters' crimes, even though the Petters scheme was enormous in its own right. Both cases happened at the height of the financial crisis, a time when trust in financial institutions and markets was already at an all-time low. Today, Tom Petters is serving his 50-year sentence at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. He has appealed his conviction multiple times, each time unsuccessfully. His co-conspirators received varying sentences, with some getting as little as a few years for their cooperation with authorities. Deanna Coleman, who blew the whistle on the scheme, received a lenient sentence in recognition of her role in bringing Petters to justice, though she still served time for her participation in the fraud. The legacy of the Petters scandal is a cautionary tale about greed, deception, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. It's a reminder that fraud can happen anywhere, even in seemingly legitimate businesses run by charismatic leaders. For investors, it underscores the importance of skepticism, thorough due diligence, and the old adage that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. $3.65 billion, 15 years of lies, hundreds of victims. Tom Petters built an empire on fantasy and lost everything. His story stands as one of the most brazen and devastating frauds in American history, a testament to how far someone will go when greed takes control and how much damage one person can inflict when trust is weaponized. The Tom Peters scandal is a dark chapter in the history of American finance, one that will not soon be forgotten,